Okay, welcome everyone to the national launch of Census Legacies. Happy to join all of you. We had over 250 people signed up. I know that people are going to be filtering in, and some will be checking this out later as a recording. Thrilled to be here with all of you. I'm Karthik Ramakrishnan, Professor of Public Policy at UC Riverside and Director of the Center for Social Innovation. I am pleased to welcome Carla Lopez Del Rio, our Associate Director and formerly with the US Census Bureau. Carla?
Hi, everybody. Just quick note to say that coming to CSI from the US Census Bureau and leading a project like this has been an amazing opportunity. I am also thrilled to see all of you here, and I look forward to the powerful conversations we're about to have. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Carla. So just a few words about Census Legacies. Hopefully you've gone to our website and seen some of the explainer videos. So we're not going to repeat too much of what's already been covered, but this is going to be an opportunity to provide an update to folks in terms of where we've come in the course of less than 3 months since September. So first, in terms of what Census Legacies is, quite simply, we are building on the foundation of census coalitions with relationships and data to create more equitable communities. This is our agenda for today. We're going to be in plenary for the first hour, where I'll be providing an update from Census Legacies. Then we're going to hear remarks from the US Census Bureau, and then regional cases as well as state reports, followed by perspectives from philanthropy in various states as well as nationally. Then we're going to go into breakout sessions where we want to hear from you in terms of what your community's plans might be when it comes to vaccine outreach, and what are the kinds of insights and experiences and relationships from census that can be engaged there. Similarly, with respect to civic engagement, and by civic engagement, we mean not only voting, but also redistricting, other kinds of civic participation, as well as leadership development, including getting people to serve on boards and commissions based on their census-related expertise. We also have a breakout session on regional planning and community development. And then finally, it's never too early to think ahead to Census 2030. Preparation for that begins now, in fact, but there's so many other census-related activities and products that are going to be relevant and useful for community. And we're excited to be in conversation with the US Census Bureau to see how we can more productively engage with the various products that the Census Bureau puts out that are relevant for community. Then we're going to have some reflections, commitments, and a call to action. And then hopefully we'll break within 2 hours. So first, in terms of who we are a cross-national network of funders, nonprofits, businesses, government agencies, and census coalitions that are building on the work of census outreach to ensure that historically undercounted groups have an equal voice in shaping the future of our communities. We have a shorter version of saying that, which I'll get to in a minute. But this is really powerful stuff. When we've gone around the country, people's eyes light up because this is what they were engaged in census for in the first place. Of course, it was about reducing the undercount, but there was so much incredible capacity building, cross-sector collaboration, social capital, and expertise that was built up. And instead of dismantling everything and saying, let's do that again 8 years from now, the idea is that we can repurpose these coalitions to do the important work of community development, community building, civic engagement, and the like. So in terms of how this got started in the Inland Empire. This is a region where the Center for Social Innovation at UCR is based. This is a region about the size of the state of South Carolina, both in terms of geography and population. So a little over 4.5 million people. And we expect that when the final census count is out, that we'll be significantly above that number. Our census partners, starting in the summer and fall of 2018, when we decided to get engaged on census, we knew that we were in the process of doing community building. That's why we got involved in the first place. And so when December and January rolled around, we started asking the question of what's next. I know that many communities are in that process now, or maybe a couple of months ago, we're actively engaging in those questions. In the Inland Empire, we had a bit of a head start. And so we can think of IE Rise, which is the Inland Empire Roadmap for an Inclusive and Sustainable Economy, as a demonstration project of census legacies. Some of that work got delayed a little bit because of the pandemic, but over the summer, our community partners got together and laid out a 10-year vision on what inclusion, sustainability, and equity looks like on a range of issues, and with various through lines of equity. We also innovated in taking the FSG model of systems change and making sure that community voice and shared values infuse the work. So that launch was in September. In August, when I started talking to other census evaluators around the country, Jocelyn Bissonnette from the Funders Committee for Civic Participation, her ears perked up. She was on this email list and she said, so many people are trying to figure out what to do next. Can we talk? And so we talked, and thanks to Jocelyn and the leadership at FCCP, we had a preview of what census legacies could be. And we had partners from around the country, including Pat Swan, who you'll be hearing from later on today, from the state of New York, and from various other partners in Houston, from the Coalition of Urban Indian centers across the country, as well as perspectives from the state of South Carolina. So that's where we were in September of 2020. In the last 3 months, we've had 6 information sessions. We have commitments from 5 counties or metropolitan areas to figure out what's next and how to build from their census legacy. We have commitments from 5 states, primarily with respect to philanthropy coalitions. And we have 2 national funder networks that are part of our advisory group that have been immensely helpful. In terms of our advisory group, I mean, it's an embarrassment of riches. It's just been such a treat to engage and learn and mutually inspire with all of these partners. And these names and organizations will be familiar to many of you. Carla and I consider ourselves incredibly fortunate in such quick time and short order for people to have jumped in so enthusiastically, feet first into this work. And you can find out more information, by the way, on our website, where you'll see our advisory group, and it's expanding by the week. So in terms of our strategy and approach, just yesterday, one of the honors we have when we work with experts in community, experts in philanthropy, experts in census, Terry Ann Lowenthal, who will be joining us, she's on a press call right now with the U.S. and on recent data released by the U.S. Census Bureau, but she'll be joining us later. Yesterday, she encapsulated something not quite in this way, and overnight I was thinking about it, and it really clicked. What we're talking about is relationships and data connected to census to solve community problems. That's what Census Legacies is about. And even shorter, we can say that we are about community R&D. And it's really powerful. It's powerful what we're already seeing and what we're going to achieve in the coming decade. One of the insights is to not keep building from scratch when it comes to community coalitions. And I'll talk about that in a minute. It's also important to continue investing in trusted messengers and inclusive coalitions. Our approach is to build from the bottom up, starting with metro and regional census coalitions, and then also engaging statewide coalitions, and ultimately building a national community of practice that can interface with other national organizations and coalitions that have been involved in census advocacy and census work for decades. Key elements of the work include peer learning, as well as technical assistance and mentoring. Some of the key insights that we've built in conversation with our partners, in conversations with our advisory board members. One, what census taught us is that trusted messengers are essential. This is especially true when trust in government is low, and it could be the federal government, it could be state government, it could be local government. Trust also varies depending on partisanship. We're going to see changes in how people trust based on who's in the White House. But we need to make sure that all community members are engaged, regardless of who is in power at whatever level of government. Another major insight was that community input needs to be all inclusive. This includes not only communities of color and indigenous communities, but also immigrant communities, LGBTQ+ populations, people with disabilities, and more. Finally, it is important to have solutions that are not handed down from the federal government, but those that are co-designed with community organizations as partners. What census outreach did was enable us to recognize the expertise of community, and this recognition not only by philanthropy, but also by government agencies and other decision makers. That's what made census so powerful in 2020 with the kind of massive investments we saw in field outreach by the US Census Bureau, and in many places, co-investments in outreach by state governments and also by philanthropy. Core principles that we think are important to any partner getting engaged with this effort is one, a commitment to inclusion of all historically undercounted and underrepresented communities. Two, a commitment to equity by 2030 and beyond. And then finally, commitment to collaboration across sectors, aiming to produce systemic reforms. Now, what this looks like could vary depending on the state, depending on the region. In some places, you might have had all of these boxes checked where you had service providers, power building groups, funders, government agencies, maybe state legislative committees that were engaged and involved, school districts, community media, academic partners, other research and learning partners, and COVID-19 recovery coalitions. Even if you don't have many of these boxes checked, that's the raw material you're working with in terms of building the work to come in the coming decade. I'll just say a little bit about the toolkit that we're developing and that we will be releasing shortly. Now, there are different kinds of applications. The way that we're going to release this toolkit is based on the kinds of activity that folks can get involved in. So there's a lot of talk now about the initial dissemination of the vaccine. So first of all, census data are critical to figure out who those vulnerable populations are. Who are the elders, for example, in your community, to make sure that we have adequate supply. Powerful way to know why accurate census data is so critical. But the work of trusted messengers is also important. So we are hopeful that as jurisdictions around the country think about who are the trusted messengers, it's not just the scientific and medical experts and the community health workers in various communities, but those that are not quote unquote health experts, but are expert in community. They need to be engaged, they need to be consulted, they need to be resourced. The faith leaders, the neighborhood association members, et cetera, that were engaged on census are ready to be engaged again, but the resources need to flow there. We also see promising work when it comes to inclusive economic development and workforce development, particularly when you consider the racial disparities. So this is from the Census Bureau's Household Pulse Survey. Massive losses in employment income for Latinx, Black, and Asian populations. It is going to be important that these communities are engaged when it comes to an equitable economic recovery. Similarly, when it comes to regional planning and community development. Home ownership rates, this is from 2018. Surely more recent data will show these racial disparities to be even worse. We need to make sure that when we're having conversations about housing, affordable housing, home ownership, that the communities that were engaged in census are also respected and meaningfully engaged when it comes to housing planning as well as other aspects of regional planning. Policy and budget advocacy. This is going to be a major issue in counties and states throughout the country. How do we ensure that communities that have been historically undercounted and underrepresented have a meaningful say when it comes to what kinds of essential social services need to be preserved as state and local governments continue to experience massive budget shortfalls? More generally, we think that there is a potential here to create an evergreen community advisory board. Instead of exhausting community issue by issue, pulling people here, pulling people there, potentially there's a role for these census coalitions to be constituted as a general community advisory group. If someone says, we need to hear the perspective of community, you have these ready-made coalitions, and it's not too late to preserve that infrastructure if you want a generalist perspective of what various disadvantaged, marginalized undercounted populations, what their perspective is. So say that there's a massive new economic development project or opportunity, instead of selectively choosing which organizations to engage or just checking off a box when it comes to community engagement, we have the opportunity to have more robust engagement at a community level from this incredible set of partners. Redistricting. You have several funders as well as community partners. The potential for innovation here is to not see this as something that is political, but to really reimagine and to engage and activate what it means to have a community of interest. We've seen some pretty egregious examples from the last decade of districts that are drawn that bear no relationship to any kind of community of interest. We are hopeful that we don't have to go through litigation again in the coming decade to undo this damage. So we are hopeful that census coalitions can really help bring about this notion of what that community of interest is. Census outreach is also civic engagement. So we have many partners that are interested in continuing that civic engagement, not only in terms of communities of interest, but various types of civic activities that go beyond voting. There's also the possibility to really innovate and strengthen leadership development. The kinds of expertise that community partners have built in terms of demographic expertise, policy expertise, the relationships that they have built can be so important in terms of serving on boards and commissions and potentially even running for public office. We also see great potential when it comes to community media and community narrative. Often this has been referred to as ethnic media, but more and more we're seeing this notion of community media. So it's not just about ethnic media. With the decimation of local media, it is so important that local and regional community narratives are plentiful, impactful, and have the recognition of those in government. This is something that in the Inland Empire we saw, that nonprofits, some of the most pressing challenges they noted was not having sufficient media recognition and government recognition. Continuing the momentum from census work enables us to hopefully make sure that community narratives are seen and heard and ultimately influential when it comes to decision making. Finally, the last two things I'm going to point to are ongoing opportunities for engagement and advocacy on census products. Census Bureau puts out so many different types of products and tools. We think that there is an opportunity to meaningfully engage with the Census Bureau, especially on its data and visualization side, and to learn from the kinds of things we're seeing in the private sector. So on the left, you see this is a tool from the New York Times that shows with pandemic response, and you can hover over it and see data that is relevant for decision making. We think that it's possible to imagine what can be done using census data and innovating in the way that we can make it not only user-friendly, but community-friendly. So to think not only in terms of user interface, but community interface. We're excited to be initiating some of these conversations and working in partnership with the Census Bureau and other partners at the national level to see what's possible. And then finally, if you go to the Census Bureau's website, and this is something that I think isn't recognized enough, the kind of community building that the Census Bureau did with people like Carla in Riverside County in the Inland Empire and thousands across the country. You have thousands of census complete count committees and then coalitions that are not even on this map. What an incredible resource and a network to activate and engage in the important work that's ahead in terms of inclusive, sustainable, and equitable communities. So to learn more, please go to our website, censuslegacies.org/contact, and please fill out that form. If you're interested in starting a Census Legacy Coalition for any of these purposes, please email Carla. And I'm gonna pause there, and now I'm gonna welcome Jennifer Shopcorn from the US Census Bureau, who's gonna have a few remarks.
Welcome. Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you for having me here today. I hope everyone is healthy and well. Karthik, you stole my thunder on a few points there, but at the risk of being repetitive, I do want to underscore how much the success of the census rests on the passion and engagement of so many people, whether they're partnership specialists we employ, but what I want to highlight today is the work you all did as partners and stakeholders in your communities, particularly reaching hard to count populations. You tend to have more penetration and trust in those communities, and can't thank you enough. In the lead up to the 2020 census, we engaged past partners to get a better understanding of what had worked really well in our partner engagement previously and where we had room for improvement, so we could build in 2020 a program that was really unique to each partner organization, whether they were a national corporation or nonprofit or a very small local grassroots neighborhood community organization. And we're just so tremendously thrilled with the work that everyone did this year. And we were already so proud of our partners and the enthusiasm they infused into their effort to educate the public about why the census is so important and motivate them to take it. And no one planned for a pandemic to hit right as the census count was starting, and to watch the creativity when in-person events were canceled and media consumption changed was so inspiring. That excitement carries with us today, and we're so excited to carry that into 2030 and do this all over again with you. As you all know, we're pretty big planners. We spend the better part of a decade planning for the next census, and we're already thinking about 2030, as you obviously are. Karthik, you've outlined your ideas really crystal clear, and I think they're really exciting. And we're doing the same thing on our end, trying to think about not just what our 2030 partnership program will look like, but how to stay in touch and stay engaged so we don't have to start all over again in 2030. We all know that the census is so important to the country and to communities. It informs, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, it informs everything from schools to transportation, and it comes around every 10 years, but we have so much data that can complement that data, that big data haul we get every 10 years from the decennial census. Karthik, you touched on a couple of the ones I was going to mention, actually. The Household Pulse Survey and the Small Business Pulse Survey have really demonstrated how we can stand something up really, really quickly on an experimental basis. And the level of response we've gotten from a positive perspective to those two surveys and their cadence and the questions that we ask has been really positive, and just glad that we can field a survey so quickly that can be responsive in such an important national situation. Another thing I want to point out, you might not know about, we have combined numerous data sets to produce community resilience estimates. And we created those before the pandemic for use for local planners and emergency authorities to respond to natural disasters. And they reflect the capacity of communities to basically absorb and recover from the impacts of a disaster, whether that be health impacts, social or economic impacts. That community resilience estimate is on our COVID-19 website, along with data from the Household Pulse Survey and Small Business Pulse Survey. So as you're starting these conversations, I think that will be a really good resource for you if you haven't already spent some time on that website. Many people are familiar with our American Community Survey that provides a whole other host of metrics around jobs, veterans, educational attainment, whether people rent or own their home. And we have our economic census, which we conduct every 5 years, that provides detailed information on businesses across a range of geographies and industries. We also collect a lot of information for other federal agencies, whether that be information on housing or crime victimization, retail trade, manufacturing. And I share all this because I think, to the point Karthik was making, communities need data, and they need to make decisions every day based on reliable and valuable information. And that's not just the Census Bureau. It doesn't participate in that conversation just on a once a decade census. It is all about all these other surveys and censuses that we conduct and provide data every day, every year. And the idea of harnessing your network that you've created around the 2020 census and the enthusiasm that you've created it, and carrying that in between each year between now and 2030, so that census data from all of our censuses and surveys can inform your engagement around so many community issues, is really exciting. Your conversations will be very important data points for us as we start to plan our work with partners now and through 2030 around all of this work that we do, not just the decennial. I am so sorry. I wish I could stay for the full run of this program today. We actually, speaking of other things that we do, we have, I point like I'm going to go to another room or something. I'm just in my office in my home, but I have to run because we're releasing our demographic analysis today. Press conference started at 1 o'clock. I was thrilled to be able to pop into this and join you for just the beginning. I apologize, can't stay until the end, but that's the beauty of the virtual environment we're living in right now. I can hopefully take some time to review the archive when you put it up, Karthik and Carla. Anyway, so our demographic analysis is being released today. It's we use birth records, death records, Medicare enrollment to estimate the size of the U.S. population, and it's an independent measure of the population that you can compare against the official census counts once those are available. I can't thank everyone else for being here today, and thank you, Karthik, for giving me a few minutes of your time, and hope everything goes well.
Thank you, Jen, and really appreciate both your thought partnership and our anticipated partnership in the years and decade ahead.
Look forward to staying in touch with everybody. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, next I'm going to be before I bring up our next set of speakers. We have a little video to share with you. This may be the first time many of you are aware of Imperial Valley and Imperial County in California. This is some of the work that we're doing with Census Legacies. Hopefully the tech works.
This is where we came and we set up. We brought a person that sells snow cones. And then we also caravanned. We went in cars and we drove around the town, making noise, honking our horns and telling people, go get a free snow cone, complete the census. And then we would ask them if they understand what the census count is about and how it can help their community.
Imperial County is the southeasternmost county in California. It borders Mexicali. It also borders Arizona. We're a mixture of Coachella Valley with a little bit of border and a lot of ag.
Because completing the census really determines a lot of the political arena, like I was saying, and the districts, I really think this time to get people to complete the census, or at least our young students or anyone really of demographics, was really understanding that if you complete the census, you can be so much better represented and our community will get more money. And that's why we also said why we completed the census.
Well, because once you see, even myself, when I see numbers go up a little bit, just even 1 or 2%, I mean, I'm like, oh man, that's great. So what do? Wake up in the morning and post something, and try to help out.
If it weren't meant for the census itself, we never had this conversation. We'd never, touch base with each other, see what other programs that we're doing besides the census. And I think for me, that's one of the greater successes,
As many barriers as we experience, we are committed to come to the table and do what we can for this community. And that, from a statewide perspective, it doesn't happen that well in larger communities as well as it does here. And frankly, that makes me very proud to be from Imperial County and just extremely grateful for the support.
We have in Imperial County abundance of land, a lot of natural resources. We also have resources like lithium that are used for batteries. Companies such as, I believe, Tesla need this resource. So we do have a great amount of assets. It's just about investing in this community to ensure that we are living to our fullest potential.
So I'm now pleased to welcome the last person you just saw in that video, Adriana Nava from Imperial County, as well as her colleagues in other parts of Southern California, Megan Thomas from San Diego County and Sarah Middleton from Orange County. So we'll start with Adriana, who will say a little bit more about the work in Imperial County and what's ahead.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Excited, a little nervous to be here. These Zoom things aren't, don't exactly make us feel, warm and fuzzy. I'd love to see you all in person. But just a little bit about myself. Again, I'm here representing the city of El Centro. We're located in Imperial County, and it's, again, the southeasternmost county in California. So California is largely known throughout the country as prosperous, Baywatch state, but yet there are counties like ourselves who really just are behind the curve on some of the other measures that other California cities already have. So with all that said, for us, our community is a very hard to count area. And Imperial County, even more so. We are separated. There's State Route 86, which connects largely most of the communities, but we're still pretty spread out. We also don't have your typical address system where mail is sent to your home. A lot of this in some of our communities are just simply PO boxes. So with all that said, it does pose a good amount of challenges to count. Some of the things that we did to make things interesting, we started pretty early in the because we knew we were a hard to count area. So we celebrate Mexican Independence Day, which is not Cinco de Mayo, it's 16 de septiembre. And we had a comedian come in as part of this large community event. And one of the funny things he said was, "Cuenten hasta el Sancho," which is count even your lover, which resonated with a lot of the people, especially being a comedian makes things a little bit more lighthearted. Following that, we did census Christmas floats. So we took the Christmas float, we decked it out with lights. We took it around to various parades, which are really in small communities, parades are a great event to get the community together and have some fun. Lastly, for government, usually the expectation is that people will come to you. And I think that those times are long gone. People who work for government, nonprofits, we have to go to the people now. So for this, we ended up hosting events at Cárdenas supermarkets. And if they filled out their census paperwork, we gave them 2 free tacos. If we saw a bigger family, we gave them maybe a little bit more. Good way to feed the community during these difficult times and also go out to them during this really, really challenging time. So how do we, intend to move as a coalition? How are we gonna really harness what we just built over these last, 10, 11 months? I think it's important that we continue to coalesce as a county for the greater good of our community. We can work together. For example, we already had our first meeting and we were talking about how, just discussing the needs among the various nonprofits and how, for example, the city is a CDBG entitlement recipient. So discussing their needs and how we can use that funding to allocate the neediest. With the ACS, American Community Survey, we know disproportionately that those numbers are incorrect a lot of the time. So working together with the census and efforts to get better estimates for our community is critical because we depend on it for grant funding, which is another huge opportunity. Lastly, we apply for grants all the time. As a city, we have one site that's an affordable housing site. And working with some of our nonprofits who work with homeless families and larger families, we were discussing how the city can work with other nonprofits to build affordable housing projects that are more reflective of our community rather than just relying on an architect designer planning out the community. So having a greater voice in the development process. That's it for me. I think I'm out of time. Passing it on to the next one.
Great. Thank you, Adriana, and appreciate folks getting us back on track. I am a little bit guilty as charged of going a little bit over my presentation. Next, we have Megan Thomas from San Diego County.
Greetings, everybody. How are you? Good to see you. My name is Megan Thomas. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am indeed speaking to you from the place I was born and raised, San Diego County, in the traditional and unceded territory of the Kumeyaay people. It was great to hear Adriana's summary of the work in Imperial County, because Imperial and San Diego counties were joined together as Region 10 in the state of California for the 2020 census work. And the coalition that did that work in this region grew to be over 150 community organizations and working together for over 2 years, leading census caravans, Zoom dance parties, and folks showing up to advocate at the various jurisdictions to ensure those who are most marginalized get the resources and the outreach that they need. So catalyst of San Diego and Imperial counties, which until a couple of weeks ago was San Diego Grantmakers, is a network of funders oriented towards action to promote an equitable, collaborative, and impactful social justice ecosystem, or social change ecosystem. And we got together with a couple of organizations in our region to help support the census. And I think the key element in our success was, on the one hand, amongst these 150 organizations, a shared respect and a decision-making process that brought together all groups, from small volunteer-led organizations to organizations with staffs of more than 100 individuals, to ensure that what strategies went forward reflected the needs of the entire region. The other key element was capacity, right? This doesn't happen magically. It does take people's time. And in our case, there were two organizations. One was the United Way of San Diego that became the ACBO for our region, which, for those outside of California, it was the designated recipient of state funding to support community-led outreach. And Engage San Diego, which is a power building coalition in the region that was founded about a decade ago and is dedicated to civic engagement for social and economic justice. Another unique aspect of how we were working was close coordination across philanthropy, across the jurisdictional funders, so the cities and the counties, and community-based organizations. And that really helped bring the community voice into the processes that were taking place across all of those platforms. And the result is that we had the best response rate in San Diego and Imperial counties for the last couple of decades. And Imperial County, Bravo Adriana, had the greatest increase in their response for the entire state. So really positive outcomes. So looking ahead, we know that we have commitment. We've convened a couple of meetings. Thank you to Karthik and Carla for joining us to help lay out what the potential is in this region. In particular, in San Diego County, I'm speaking to. We have numerous groups, a couple of dozen folks interested in continuing this novel coordination where the core element is really a commitment to civic engagement and power building, regardless of the issue, the population, et cetera, and recognizing that by sharing strategies, sharing resources, and showing up for one another in solidarity, we really become a stronger voice in the field. Engage San Diego continues to be a leader. They have been doing this for a decade and will continue to do so. So the question is, how do we retain the broader county-wide connection and coordination? And how do we resource that infrastructure while not duplicating efforts that already exist? The first priority, the first test case for this group is to look at the COVID-19 vaccine, to think about how do we get trusted messengers out delivering effective information, accurate information into communities. We have a county-led effort, of course. We have a healthcare-led effort, and now there's this community interest to amplify and coordinate. So bringing all of those conversations is going to be the test of how well we can bring that legacy of census work forward into ongoing efforts. And I'll wrap up just by saying, I don't know what will look like 6 months from now, but there will be something here because everybody is very enthusiastic, and regardless, Catalyst is going to continue to coordinate and advocate the resources that support an environment in which the voices of those most marginalized are centered on how we shape our future.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Megan. Next, we have Sarah Middleton reporting out on what's going on in Orange County. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you, Karthik. Hello, everybody. It's so great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. I'm your last Southern California speaker, and I'm here to talk to you about what we did in Charitable Ventures in Orange County. So I was a census consultant for Charitable Ventures, which is a nonprofit incubator and fiscal sponsor. And we got to work on the census in December of 2018 with a group of 15 fantastic nonprofits and funders. We ended up growing that group to 453 unique members by the time the census closed in October. And I know that we have several of our incredible partners from Orange County on today's Zoom. So hi, everybody. Good to see you here. We were awarded a state contract of $1.4 million from the California Complete Count Office. And then throughout the census campaign, we're given some additional funds to focus on veterans outreach and non-response follow-up outreach. Additionally, we started a private philanthropy pooled fund, which we dubbed the OC Census Fund, and we're able to raise just over $1 million to augment our public dollars. At the most intense period of our census outreach campaign, we were facilitating and connecting 54 different funded partners, so nonprofits of varying sizes and reach across Orange County. And we also funded 32 smaller organizations that pre-pandemic were poised to launch questionnaire assistance centers around Orange County. And we had the privilege and honor of working very closely and very well with colleagues at the U.S. Census Bureau, our local partnership specialist team, colleagues at the County of Orange, Orange County Department of Education, First Five Orange County, and several other census stakeholders around Orange County. So it was a true collaboration. We knew when the census was wrapping up that we did not want to lose this collaboration. We didn't want to lose this infrastructure that had been building for going on 2 years in Orange County. So we pivoted and we went from the Orange County Census Community Table to the Civic Engagement Advisory Council. And we had our first meeting about a month ago. We actually have our second meeting tomorrow. And this is a group of about 18 nonprofits and funders who worked deeply in census outreach here in Orange County, who are committed to broadening civic engagement across the nonprofit sector here. And our goal is to put together a 10-year strategic plan that will carry us into the 2030 census. So we're extremely pleased and excited to be part of Census Legacies and together work with our Civic Engagement Advisory Council and Census Legacies to keep this momentum up in Orange County. The last thing I'll mention is that we have a slide deck of our work at Charitable Ventures on the Census Legacies website. So you're welcome to check it out and learn more about what worked here in Orange County. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. And that slide deck will be up right after this, this presentation. Really appreciate all of you and the incredible work. As I said before, Census Legacies, we had this early pilot in the Inland Empire, but we're just so inspired to see what's happening in other places. And again, not only in Southern California, but around the country. So I'm pleased now to welcome Susan Balbas from Washington Community Alliance, the Na'a Elahi Fund, as well as XP Lee from the Minnesota Council of Foundations. And I'll say that Carla and I, part of our joy is to be invited into various coalition meetings, and what we saw in Washington Community Alliance just blew us away. So Susan, welcome, and would love to hear more.
Thank you so much. And thanks for having me today. I really appreciate the time. Yeah, and thanks for that little comment on Washington Community Alliance. We started out as the Washington Census Alliance in 2018, similar to other groups. We were co-founders. We came together, a lot of kind of seasoned community organizers across the state, mostly centered in the Puget Sound region, the most popular region of Washington state. And we formed the Washington Census Alliance, which is a coalition of 92 organizations to date, led by and working in the hard to count communities, right? Communities of color across the state. So our shared goal was to launch a really ambitious campaign to reach our historically undercounted populations for Census 2020. So we met a lot. My staff got really mad at me because I personally went to lots and lots of meetings, hosted them pre-COVID, but it was really rich and really great, where we just really strategized together and really came upon the idea of trusted messengers as being the best vehicle, right, to do this census education outreach. So when we got our, we kind of got our model together, and we made a successful case to the Washington State Legislature, who appropriated $15 million for outreach. which had never happened before either. And so we were, that was our first big win. So I think part of our takeaway is that we feel really proud to live in a state that really honors and knows that a healthy society is also fair and just for all of us. And we're really, willing to commit a good sum of money. And we also thank the Office of Finance and Management, who we worked with at the state, which was just fantastic. So the Washington Census Alliance, like I said, now has 92 organizations in over 20 counties across Washington. And we deployed a relational organizing model, which attracted and recruited about 700 trusted messengers across the state. We worked with local government, with the Census Bureau, to really do our best to ensure a fair and accurate count, and especially given COVID. It was, as we all know, it was quite challenging. But during this period of the census, we reached over 22,000 people with targeted education and outreach, messaged, developed for each community. So these organizations were supported by the teams, staff and advisors, and a coordinating committee made up of 12 organizations that are part of the Alliance. So now we're going to be transitioning, or to use the keyword of 2020, pivot, which I think I've heard 1,000 times, is that we're pivoting into a different community civic engagement model with projects that I'm going to be talking about a little bit, including first will be redistricting, is where we're focusing right now and getting community input into the process. So our role at Na'ilahi Fund was to facilitate and coordinate outreach to tribal nations and urban natives across the state. And so we made 27 grants, and of the 27 grants, we had 12 sovereign nations, 12 native nonprofits, and 3 community groups, which were our canoe families, for a total of approximately 147 trusted messengers that we trained and certified across the state. So our preliminary results tells us that 79% of tribes in Washington increased their response rate, even given all the challenges of COVID. So we are very, very proud of what we know so far. So in 2020, the response rate for Washington State's Native American tribes were nearly 10% higher than the national average for Native Americans living on reservations. So Na'ilahi Fund and Latino Community Fund were the 2 philanthropic organizations that are also community funds and embedded in the community. So as an intertribal organization, we were uniquely positioned to do this work. And Latino Community Fund, same thing. And I believe Ankita is going to talk a little bit more about that, because it was very unique that we were and are members of the Census Alliance, but also members of Philanthropy Northwest Census Equity Partners. So that was a very interesting and fruitful collaboration. So
just in the interest of time, if I can just ask you to wrap up.
Yes. So looking forward, we have changed the name of Washington Census Alliance to Washington Community Alliance. And some of the things that we're going to be, some of the activities we'll be doing is continued engagement of the trusted messengers, facilitating community input into redistricting, building civic engagement within urban and rural BIPOC communities at the local and state levels, researching and developing state policies that are relevant to BIPOC community, inclusive get out the vote campaigns, advancing BIPOC leadership at policy tables. I know we're talking a lot about leadership. And of course, changing our name to the Washington Community Alliance. So stay tuned for more. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Susan. And yeah, we look forward to hearing more and learning more. That's one of the powerful things about with Census Legacies. There's a solid amount of peer learning and mutual inspiration going on. Next, we have XP Lee from Minnesota. XP, welcome.
Hello, everybody. Great. I don't think I have much more to add to what everyone has said so far. Our conversations in Minnesota started back in 2015. We were fortunate enough to have a lot of tuned in and very insightful individuals who were able to come together. Joan Amark with Minnesotans for the American Community Survey, Marcia Avner on the board of the Bauman Foundation and connected to the Funders Census Initiative, and our really wonderful state demographer, Susan Brower from our Demographics Center in Minnesota. Working across all levels of sectors, from public to nonprofits to philanthropy to business, getting everybody involved, communications and ethnic media, and really on the ground organizations. There's just so much going on, and so much that we were really able to accomplish. I wouldn't be able to do it justice here. But one really wonderful thing that I wanted to share with all of you is that we actually have a website and a full report and some information to share. So we were able to get that recently. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this website into the chat. Please, go to the website, check out our numbers, download our reports, our census impact story, as well as our other toolkits and information that can help to really flesh out the full story of Minnesota. But it was an amazing and wonderful experience. We came in at number 1 in the nation for self-response rate, which is 75.1%. And just to give you an idea of how amazing that was, we beat the national average back in May, the 67.7%. And we were so together that in October, when we're trying to really push towards the end and not sure when that deadline would be, we were able to really muster some phone banking sessions into targeted communities to be able to eke out that last 0.1 percentage, which helped us to beat our 2000 self-response rate as well. So we beat 2010 and we beat our 2000 self-response rates. We've raised over $4 million over 4 years. We touched over 300 plus organizations, city governments, counties. We had 1.3 million unique touches across all of our partners, and we were able to host about 1.5 thousand events to be able to connect, mostly virtually, but some in person as allowed with COVID. And obviously COVID-19 threw a big wrench into our relational organizing strategy, but again, we were able to come together well enough, and we're ready ahead of the time to be able to make the adjustments to the COVID-19, the challenge of COVID-19, as well as the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. So thank you very much, Karthik, for this time, and check out that website. Thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you, XP. And I think you mentioned, XP, earlier that redistricting is the major thing that you're pivoting to, right, in terms of post-census work?
Yes, but obviously we're really looking forward to staying involved with Census Legacies and continuing the work towards 2030, as well as building up our civic infrastructure in Minnesota for our grassroots organizations and BIPOC communities into the future.
Excellent, thank you, XP. By the way, and this is something that is just coming up right now, and I know that XP, we had talked about this many of us on our planning call last week is in terms of pandemic response. So XP will be co-facilitating the conversation on vaccine outreach and how census coalitions potentially could play a role. Okay, next, I'm going to bring up leaders in philanthropy, both at the state level and in national networks. So first we have Susan Raicher from Florida Counts. We're also joined by Pat Swan from the New York Census Equity Fund, Ankita Patel from Philanthropy Northwest, and Maggie Osborne from United Philanthropy Forum. So we'll start with Susan. And again, if you can just say a little bit about what census meant, but then to think ahead about, with all these various possibilities, at least what seems to be bubbling up as areas of interest. So we'll start with Susan.
Thank you. And it's really humbling to be here today because many of the folks on this phone were muses for the development of Florida Counts. I'm Susan Raicher. I'm Vice President and CFO of the Wallace Coulter Foundation. And it's my role as one of the founding members of Florida Counts Census 2020 that I speak to you today. I know you think of Florida beaches and beautiful weather, and yes, that's true, but Florida is also a state that has huge rural areas, huge areas of hard to enumerate folks, internet deserts, and is the biggest state in terms of the percentage of migration versus natural births in population count. And Florida also, it was number 3 in the country in poor outcomes for the 2010 census. So I give you that landscape because they say necessity is the mother of invention, and that's what happened here. Our 8-member coalition consists of 2 associations, 3 funders, and 3 nonprofits. We came together in the late summer of 2019, right before the census, in response to the recognition that we would not be having a statewide complete count committee or funding. Both Maggie and Ankita had a huge role in helping us launch and inspiring local funders to participate in a pooled fund that made grants to 67 organizations, as well as a cohesive and centralized website, media plan, outreach plan, text messaging, education, and bringing the best knowledge of national organizations into Florida. So what does it mean for philanthropy? The nature of this group, which speaks to and resonates with Karthik's message on census, is that we came together, nonprofits and funders. The nonprofits informed our infrastructure on how we make grants. We did it with a minimum of red tape, a minimum of paperwork, and a maximum of support. And the grantees all told us that this was really meaningful to them. I mentioned that Florida was had really poor outcomes in 2010. What does it mean to philanthropy when the lost federal funding in our state from 2010 to 2020 equals 100% of the annual philanthropic annual giving in our state? $2 billion a year that went away because there was an inaccurate count. So we gave philanthropy a number of things. Leveraging their investment. The national funders inspired local funders, the local funders inspired national funding, and an infrastructure and a platform. Going forward, this was so meaningful that the same group moved together to do Vote 2020 and raised a fund for that and continued the relationships. As Coulter, we're encouraging all of our state and national partners to continue to engage with their coalitions, because these coalitions are precious, they're trusted, and they are listened to by their communities. And with that, I will say thank you to all of those who helped us in Florida. We really hit the ball out of the park in terms of the census and hope to do that going forward.
Great, thank you, Susan. And I'll say with the Culture Foundation, and our API data work is a beneficiary of that And it's really significant and so grateful that the Cultural Foundation has identified Census Legacies as a key framework for its investments in the coming years, both in Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, as well as their investments in Native communities. So really grateful for that. Next, I'm going to turn to Pat Swan from the New York Census Equity Fund.
Okay, thank you, Karthik. I'm a senior program officer at New York Community Trust, the community foundation for the city of New York. And I'm chair of the steering committee for the New York State Census Equity Fund. I'm told we're running a little bit late, so I'll try to be very quick. So I've been asked to say in 3 minutes what the Census Fund meant, what the census meant for my foundation and for the pooled fund that we established with my peers and colleagues in foundations throughout New York State, and also to say a bit about what our plans are going forward. So just to give a little bit of context, the New York State Census Equity Fund involved 36 foundations. We were governed by a 12-person steering committee, and we raised about $3.5 million, of which $3.2 million was dispersed in grants to about 65 different organizations to support census awareness and census outreach. We funded trusted messenger community-based organizations. We also supported libraries. We supported academic centers like the Digital Equity Lab at the New School and the Center for Ethnic Media at the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. We supported a couple of merchant associations, and we also supported regional organizations like the New York Civic Engagement Table. We are just about to complete an independently commissioned evaluation of our work. And so I'm preempting that evaluation a little bit here this morning with a couple of purely subjective assessments and observations. So as we all know, the pandemic hit New York City and New York State just as we were gearing up for Census Day. Fortunately, we had been making grants and laying the groundwork for census outreach for over a year. But of course, everything census related was put on hold when the entire state went on lockdown on March 13th. And it didn't really pick up again until June. So lesson number one for me was preparation. If we had not had the foresight to begin making grants as early as the spring of 2017 was really our first grant, then it would have been impossible to lay that groundwork and build those relationships in the midst of also simultaneously responding to the pandemic. And so we would have been totally lost. Lesson number two, the value of relationships. I know it sounds a bit cliched, but I just want to emphasize the importance of especially cross-sector relationships that bring together foundations, nonprofit organizations, government, and the business community. I can't say that we all were rowing in the same direction at the same time at every moment, but the level of our intent to coordinate and the ongoing and constant communication was really, really critical. And from my own personal perspective, the biggest learning that I got was from my counterparts across the state. At New York Community Trust, we have affiliates in Long Island and Westchester County, and in addition to the 5 boroughs of New York City. So I have a good sense of the New York City metropolitan area, but it's a big state. It's a diverse state. And I realized that I had shockingly little connection to foundations in the rest of the state. And this is despite the reality that so much of the policy around issues that we care about are decided at the state level. As we've seen in the past 6 weeks, state legislatures are also incredibly important in various aspects of our democracy. And so I am really, really proud that, that we've been able to create a network, a statewide network of funders that will obviously have lots of impact and ongoing impact way beyond the census. A lot of at the core of that is an organization called Engage New York that, that we retained pretty early on to help us with a lot of our census work. We also were in close and
Pat, I'm just going
constant
to ask you
communication.
to wrap up if you can.
Oh, okay. All right. I was gonna mention lesson 3 is something that I'd like to lift up, and that's the tendency to plan for the next battle based on the battle that just ended. But we don't know what challenges Census 2030 will bring. And so I feel that it's really important to keep the networks and relationships in place. And for that reason, the Census Legacies community that Karthik and Carla are pulling together is really, really important. Going forward, we are going to be looking at redistricting. We've already made a few significant commitments. I'm very interested in learning today about how people are deploying the census networks that they've created to deal with everything from COVID vaccine education to advocacy around the American Community Survey, to efforts to embed a census infrastructure of sorts at the local and state levels of government and beyond. So I guess I'll close there.
Excellent. Thank you, Pat. And yes, please do stick around, folks, for the breakout sessions. I know there's a lot of information coming at you, and I'm sure you have a lot that you would like to share. So after Ankita and Maggie, we're going to jump into breakout. So, but next, I'm thrilled to welcome Ankita Patel from Philanthropy Northwest. Ankita.
Thank you, Karthik. Hello, everybody. My name is Ankita Patel, she, her pronouns. While Philanthropy Northwest operates in a 6-state region, I'm going to focus on our efforts in Washington State for today. Just know that we have amazing partners across all 6 states of our member region. First and foremost, in terms of philanthropy, we emphasized that philanthropy was not just a funder when it came to the 2020 census, but a stakeholder. And that was sort of like our approach to engaging our members and our network in the importance of their involvement within the 2020 census. The Washington Census Equity Fund, which is a pooled fund that the Philanthropy Northwest held here in Washington State, our role was to coordinate philanthropic strategy, engagement, and funding. Our equity fund consisted of pooled fund partners, aligned partners, as well as community liaisons like the Niley Fund and Susan Belvas, whom you heard from earlier. Our pooled fund generated over $2 million. Our aligned partners directly invested in community in roughly around that same sum, if not more. And together we were able to really support community organizations, form coalitions ahead of the state funding that was issued in the summer of last year. Our basic principle throughout 2019 and part of this year was how do we show up for community? And, Susan talked a little bit about the budget advocacy that the Washington Census Alliance led. We were in the background supporting infrastructure of the Census Alliance, as well as lending our expertise in having them successfully advocate for and secure the $15 million from the state. And like I said, it's almost about like, how do we work hand in hand with the community groups on the ground? And whether it was lending our expertise, engaging with them, listening to them every step of the way, and working through challenges around philanthropic funding as well as state funding to see how we can minimize the barriers. So that is sort of like our very quick and dirty version of what the Equity Fund did. I would say that our cross-sector relationship building and just trust among each other has really ramped up in the past year and a half, and we hope to continue leaning on those relationships as we move forward. Our next step is going to be evaluating our work and looking at our entire ecosystem and how we did and what really worked and where we can use those lessons in doing civic infrastructure support in other areas. So with that, I will hand it back to you, Karthik, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ankita. And as Susan had mentioned earlier, thank you for your leadership in the peer learning and during the census work. And I see a lot of similarities with, for example, Catalyst, formerly San Diego Grantmakers, right, in terms of what role can these philanthropy serving organizations do to kind of hold that space and to really make sure that we don't lose momentum and lose these threads. So with that, I'll turn it over to Maggie Osborne, who, when we told her about Census Legacies, her eyes just lit up. And by the way, most people we talk to about this, they're like, we need something like this. So Maggie, welcome, and help close us out here.
Thank you, Karthik. So I imagine that many of us, or I hope many of us, feel that same way, that when we think about the experience we've had with this census, that it was a unique one. I've been in the field for 30 years. It felt unique to me. It felt like a broader cross-section of people that were really in it for the reasons of sharing power and equity and making sure people were seen and now represented. And so we got involved as a national network of 89 regional and national philanthropy serving organizations that represent more than 7,000 foundations. We wanted to use the network as a way to amplify the importance of the census. I started in early 2016, and when I started the work, no one wanted to talk to me about the census in the philanthropy world. And so we persisted. And we had a project grant that enabled 5 of our Midwest organizations to really do deep dive work by setting up funder tables. We uplifted what they learned as well as other resources and spread it across the country and seeded it with some very small grants that were enough to enable people to take this to their board to say, we've been given a small grant to learn more about the census. And so that fueled a fire that became something that I've never seen before. Philanthropy, who had never engaged in advocacy and public policy work, were suddenly really interested. As it got more complicated, it seemed like people got more interested, which was the only blessing in this journey in that regard. But people began to understand once we showed them data about how much money would be coming down from the federal government based on the count and what would be left unfunded. And so that really resonated with philanthropy, and they engaged in a way I'd never seen before. Just to give you 2 quick examples before we break, because I don't want to take more time. When we first needed to send comments to the Commerce Department about including the citizenship question, and we wanted to block that, within 48 hours, in partnership with my member FCCP and all of our members in our network, we had over 300 foundations sign on those comments that were submitted. We had so many more involved in the amicus brief that went to the Supreme Court. Then we had, just the most recent piece, 24 hours to get signatures on the comments that went to the Commerce Department and to the Congress about asking them not to cut it short. We had over 500 foundations sign on. So there are 2 things I'm trying to keep at play. One is that community of foundations all across the country in partnership with our member associations to keep them investing in what is our civil infrastructure, to understand it undergirds everything that we care about and everything that they want to do. So getting to those grassroots and grass top organizations, but also funding public policy and the fights that we will have to fight on a federal level to keep things moving. These are the tables and these are the energy I'm really excited about working with Census Legacies about. And I'm really excited to hear what you all have to say. So I will stop there.
Excellent. Thank you, Maggie. And then thank you all to our speakers. We're going to put up a poll for everyone. So just 1 minute here. Hopefully this works. Okay. So in this poll, if you can, and you can select multiple options here. We're just going to leave it open for about 30 seconds. In terms of what aspects of post-census work interests you the most. And some of these are, larger buckets. So one is vaccine outreach, including trusted messengers and planning related to that. Civic engagement, including redistricting and leadership development. Community development, including housing and regional planning. And then finally, engagement on census products, advocacy, and planning from 2021 to 2030. So let's just give another 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so I'm going to close it out. Okay, people are still typing things in. Okay, so wow, so it's a good decent spread. Civic engagement is the most frequent response, but a fair number of people, vaccine outreach is on their minds, as well as this ongoing census engagement and community development more generally. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us again. And Eric, if I can ask your assistance to highlight the speakers that are going to be doing the report back. So I see XP is already spotlighted. Let me see if I can help you here, Eric, as well. See Adriana spotlighted. I'm going to spotlight Terry Ann. Hopefully Jerry is here as well. And then we need Maggie spotlighted. So while we're waiting for others to be spotlighted, let's hear from XP. XP, what were you hearing? And we need to make up a little bit of time, so maybe if you can keep it to just 2 minutes, high level overview in terms of what's popping up in terms of vaccine outreach.
Yeah, I mean, just first off, Minnesota, we're just, getting going. We just received our first batches yesterday. And so, we're getting the structures in place, but we've been laying the groundwork in terms of engagement. And that's where it seems a lot of people are at, really trying to drive down into, how to best work with our structures, our trusted messengers. There was another term here that we heard that was really great, goodwill ambassadors, to really transition the structures into this area to really, make those connections at that grassroots level, that trusted messenger level. And then, I think there were some really also solid issues that were brought up towards the end of the conversation in terms of timing. We kind of had a hectic end to the census. And it's kind of, carrying over into this vaccine area too, in terms of, how and when are we going to get our vaccines, to be able to distribute, how many, where, where can I go, who can I trust? And, are people going to get engagement fatigue in terms of, communicating maybe too early? And definitely we don't want to be too late. Connecting to, how do we make that connection between priorities, right? Federal have their, the federal government has their prioritization, but how does that translate to our historically undercounted communities and hard to count populations? And then there's a really great question about funding. Some states weren't able to get funding from the state. We were lucky to be able to get some. Others got a lot more. So how can we find the funding to help wherever we're at, whether it's from philanthropy, making most of it, and or some public dollars, if at all possible, to be able to distribute these vaccines and engage communities to be able to distribute the vaccines. So those are my updates.
Thank you, XP. And it's amazing when all these ideas start popcorning, right? I love that goodwill ambassador. Already we can anticipate all sorts of problems. Fatigue, like you mentioned, there's so many analogies with census, but then we can also find areas of compression when there's a lot of anxiety and maybe even, thorny decisions and debates and how much is community engaged in terms of, the kind of demand that exists, but then also all of the reluctance too. So you could have problems on both ends, not enough supply to meet the demand, but maybe not enough demand, and kind of supply that's waiting there for community to engage. So thank you so much, XP. Next, I see Maggie Osborne, who's going to do a report out on civic engagement.
Great, thanks. We had a huge group. Obviously, people are thinking about it. I think a couple of things that came up very strongly were that the transition to redistricting is a little bumpy for some because of this perception that it's not the next part of census, which is what we should be talking about, but that it is really political. So some people are backing off, but we do have some that are continuing to move, and we need to move those groups. I think, FCCP offers great resources. There are resources available to people. One of the things we talked about in general too was an issue of language. Like I said, when people find that redistricting sounds too political, I just say fair representation and really talk about the census, because it's a continuation of that. I think that there was a lot of energy when we were asking about what kind of a peer group would you like? What kind of things do you want to talk about? The list is really long. I hear an enormous amount of energy from people of wanting to stay together, wanting to continue to support grassroots, community-based organizations. So it sounds like I have my work cut out for me to try and continue to make funders make that connection to the people on the ground doing the work, and how valuable they are as a resource to build civic engagement and civil society. So I think there's a lot of great comments in the chat, and I thank the team that came into the room with me.
Great, thank you, Maggie. And this is, even with the full half hour, it would not have been enough time.
Nope.
But we're hoping that these kind of conversations can continue and really start getting more advanced, right? Especially when we think beyond redistricting to leadership development, right? Boards and commissions and other kinds of ways that people can serve based on their census experience. Next, I see Adriana Nava, who I had the pleasure of joining briefly in the community development conversation and regional planning conversation.
Yeah, I'll keep it.
Adriana.
So many of the themes are reoccurring. It's funny that we all had different topics, but really we're all, going back to grassroots and community engagement and how important it is in each one of our communities. In terms of, hearing from the group, one of the things that really resonated is how we're all eager to continue to work together and even work with maybe uncommon partners to move our communities forward. So that really resonated with me. And the other thing, that the continuing topic of we don't have to be so boring, even if it's just the census. We were thinking of even great t-shirts for the future, and maybe not being so politically correct in how that resonates with our community so much more than when we just say complete the census, you count, like none of that really. But when you include humor or something that other people are familiar with, it not only gets the smile, but they remember it. And so that we thought that was pretty powerful as well.
Great.
For me.
Thank you. Thank you, Adriana. And then finally, real pleasure to have Terry Ann and Jerry joining us. Jerry Green from National Urban League and Terry Ann Lowenthal, who is a noted national expert and consultant on all things census. So Terry Ann and Jerry, welcome.
Thank you. Jerry, I'm going to actually turn this over to you and only start just to, partly in the interest of time, but just have to say, because Adriana mentioned t-shirts, I was known for waylaying people in the halls of Congress after I had left Congress to say, the next census is almost here. It was the year ending in 4. They'd look at me like I was crazy. So I think you're right. We should print up t-shirts that say the 2030 census is coming. I'm going to turn it over to Jerry and just thank everyone in our breakout room for some really excellent sort of ideas and for their enthusiasm.
Very well. And Terry, and you have good ears, and also you fill in where I leave something out.
Right.
We talked about the kinds of documents and materials that we might want to save and preserve that would inform this process as we move forward. Things like toolkits were mentioned, fact sheets. There are lots of fact sheets with lots of excellent information, toolkits that have contacts and connections and processes that we could duplicate and refresh for if we want to do COVID outreach or something like that, for instance. The Minnesota folks have already put out lessons learned and documents, I think, on the website. Joan Neymark can provide more information in that in the chat section, if you will. Lists of presentations that have been made. There have been some great presentations that showed how we pivoted from pre-pandemic to pandemic outreach, all of those things, data visualization. We even talked about expanding or looking carefully at how our language should evolve as it relates to the quote unquote hard to count populations or historically underserved. I consider the white population hard to count because we overcount that population decade after decade after decade. Nobody talks about that. We also talked about utilizing existing networks and frameworks that are already there and building upon them. like the Census Bureau's Census Information Center program, which was developed in 1988 to break down and analyze and make census data usable to our communities, how to make it palatable so we can recognize that, hey, they're talking about us. And in many of the Census Bureau's pieces, you don't see that automatically. So the CIC program was one. Statistics in schools, which needs to be evergreened so that there be statistical literacy across the intercentral census survey so that we understand what the ACS is about and how it impacts our community, so that we can understand pop estimates and things. So how can we utilize those mechanisms that are already in place to analyze, disseminate, and even train our communities on the use of census data and how it benefits our communities? So I'll stop there. Terry Ann, you got something to add to that?
No, I think that was great. And I said there are a lot of good ideas that were captured about how to make sure this information is available to everyone, and then how to help people use it effectively to sustain and expand the understanding of why participating in a census matters to people's everyday lives.
Thank you, all of you. And I should also add, the privilege of working with folks like Jerry and Terry Ann and others that have, been, what is that expression? This is not their first rodeo when it comes to census engagement. There are other advocacy opportunities, and I say this as someone who has training in demography and hadn't thought about it, in terms of advocacy when it comes to population estimates. When Terry Ann had mentioned that, I was like, yes, brilliant, that's true. Of course, maybe there are cities that are losing population that have done this for a while, but it is so important for jurisdictions to realize that there are those advocacy opportunities and ongoing engagement opportunities with these various information centers and other kinds of resources, including the Census Bureau itself. So thank you so much for reminding us of that. And hopefully we can deepen the engagement and innovate as we move forward. So next, we're going to have reflections, commitments, and a call to action. So I'm going to call up Jocelyn Bissonnette, who I'd mentioned before, from the Funders Committee for Civic Participation, Manuel Santamaria from the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, and Miki Noguchi from the National League of Cities. So from each of you, just some quick reflections. And even though it's still early to think about the next decade, what are the kinds of maybe soft commitments or call to action that you could offer to us? So Jocelyn, we'll start with you.
Great, thank you. This has been such a wonderful 2 hours. I'm Jocelyn Bissonnette. I'm director of the Funders Census Initiative at the Funders Committee for Civic Participation. We've been helping to mobilize philanthropy around the census, all with a focus on historically undercounted communities in partnership with our leadership team, the Democracy Funders Census Subgroup, and the United Philanthropy Forum. We've also been convening funders and practitioners for the last several years. And last week we met to celebrate the work, examine the most pressing census issues, and also start thinking a little bit ahead. And I want to share just 4 6-word memoirs that were created, which I think capture the incredible will to leverage what we've learned and built, which is so palpably displayed and felt on this event today. And they are: Census is the story of America. Grassroots, grass tops, and treetops stand together. Trusting the community, building bridges together. Building power, strengthening relationships, creating movements. This community has demonstrated incredible creativity, flexibility, and resilience, all as the stakes for this work have come into clearer focus through the pandemic, economic crisis, natural disasters, and racial justice uprisings. At FCCP, we believe in a society where communities have the power to make a difference on issues that impact their lives, a culture of participation that inspires their engagement, and an open and equitable democracy. Census has been a critical strategy to achieve these ideals, break down silos between national and state funders, strengthen philanthropy's advocacy muscle, test models of grant making, and broaden the network of democracy funders. This work is about building permanent infrastructure. It is fundamentally about equity and justice. And the stakes, if we sit out or step back, are too high. The philanthropic community must engage around fair representation and redistricting, elections, and democracy reform, or we risk a distorted, regressive, unaccountable, and unrepresentative democracy for the next decade. FCCP is committed to engage funders around these issues in a way that centers long-term power building for BIPOC communities. We are so grateful to Karthik, who was looking forward in August when so many of us had our heads down, focused on census policy and outreach, as well as to Carla and the whole Census Legacies Network for this inclusive and intersectional learning community that we are very proud to be a part of. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. So appreciate that. Next, Manuel Manny Santa Maria from Silicon Valley Community Foundation.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for staying on for the last couple hours. I will make it very quickly. Karthik, thanks to the UCR team, for the work that you've done, putting this together. For us in the Bay Area, the commitments from the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, as we've been talking about what comes next, is I agree with everything that Jerry had to say in terms of, how do we perpetuate, how do we continue the energy and the structures related to the census? But I would actually put a question out there for folks. 2030 is not that far away. And in 10 years, I know that we see a lot of turnover between nonprofits and local government. And for me, one thing that I've always thought about is where do we keep the documents, the information that each nonprofit collects to do the work on the ground? And how do we pass it on? So a commitment perhaps to actually working, step by step in actually archiving and documenting, or putting those documents in an archive that actually help the next folks that come behind, because we don't know where we're going to be in 10 years. I think local government for us, I've seen that, new city manager, new local representatives. And so, working with them to actually ensure that the energy and the infrastructure that we built over the last 10 years continues on is going to be really important. And so for community foundations in our region, one of the things that we want to do is really create toolkits based on the other toolkits that are out there, but specifically on how to work with boards, how to actually write a memo of why the census is important, and as basic as that, and thinking about what technology is going to bring in 10 years. How do we communicate with our constituency in order to actually amplify the census? And I think those three things are really important to actually take a look at the future. But for us, the commitment is enduring and ongoing. So thank you, Karthik, and the rest of the team.
Thank you, Manuel, and absolutely. I mean, we knew several years in advance that this was going to be at least a largely digital census in that first wave. But, with the various kinds of tools we already have and thinking about that innovation, not 8 years from now, but what we can do ongoing is so important. Finally, we have Miki Noguchi from the National League of Cities. Miki, welcome.
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful session. It's been great hearing the stories of everyone's work in this incredible, memorable year. My name is Miki Noguchi. I'm the program manager of Cities Count at the National League of Cities. Our census work is actually housed within the Local Democracy Initiative, which has a central mission of encouraging municipalities to make permanent, ongoing investment in civic education and local democracy, exactly along the lines of things that we have been discussing today. Our census work this year focused almost exclusively on encouraging municipalities and their community partners to target historically undercounted communities and to deepen or establish existing relationships and strengthen those relationships between municipalities and the local communities, historically undercounted communities. So we're now actually getting ready to move away from our 2020 GOTC focus, of course, into our 2021 work plan that starts with nonpartisan, municipal-led, community-engaged redistricting. So with the amazing representation that's on this call today, if you are with a municipality or if you work closely with a municipality that you think would be interested in getting involved in either our Cities Count or Cities Vote programs, where we offer technical assistance, specifically with municipal work and sort of abilities and constraints in mind, especially in this year where municipal budgets have just been, slashed. Please do reach out. I'll put the email address in the chat box. It's censusrapidresponse@nlc.org, and I'll put that in there again. Karthik asked me to share some examples of cities and municipalities that are, or local government that are have already started to demonstrate a commitment to this ongoing civic participation of repurposing their census infrastructure beyond the count into nonpartisan, focused on historically undercounted groups, which, as has been mentioned numerous times in this discussion already, those historically undercounted groups are also historically underrepresented. They're also historically underserved in public health outreach. They're also most likely to have been disproportionately impacted by everything that we've seen happening with COVID and the national movement around racial justice and equity this year. So just a couple of examples that really range from tiny towns in South Carolina to large cities across the country. So I'll start off with actually in Clayton County, Georgia, the public library system there is training and engaging all of their library staff across the entire public library system, their staff and their volunteers, to educate residents on opportunities of civic engagement, which includes voter education, letting them know about election dates, when to register, deadlines, things like that. In the small town of Holly Hill, South Carolina, they are looking to engage their historically undercounted communities, which include a lot of communities of color, through civic events like a holiday car caravan, sort of through a decorated downtown where they can also talk about important civic messages. In Village of Palm Springs, Florida, and a couple of other towns that I don't have the names off the top of my head, but they're actually engaging in partnering with local schools, elementary, middle, and high school, on youth leadership and citizenship ambassador programs, where they're going to be training both the students and the teachers on civic education, which includes, of course, census outreach. What are the impacts of that data, and other aspects of civic engagement. So those are just a few examples. I know we're tight on time, so I'll hand it back over to you, Karthik.
Thank you, Miki. So as we close, there's one final poll, and please do take the time, because we're curious with the various topics, not just the breakout sessions, but the more detailed topics that we had. We want to get a read on what the level of interest would be. And again, you can, these are multiple choices. So we're going to leave this open for about 30 seconds just for folks to select, or maybe a little bit more than 30. So it starts off with various things related to community building and community engagement, including vaccine, economic and workforce development, regional planning, policy and budget advocacy, this notion of an evergreen community advisory board that can be tapped across multiple issues rather than issue by issue, redistricting, integrated voter engagement, leadership development, community media and community narrative, and making sure that those voices are heard. And then finally, ongoing community engagement on various census products that are going to be coming out in the years ahead. So I'll leave another, let me count to 10. Actually, I'll count from 5. I don't want to do the whole 10 countdown. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Great, thank you. I'm going to share the results so you can see. And yeah, a fair number thinking about vaccine outreach, redistricting, and integrated voter engagement. So we have a lot of civic engagement, interest, leadership development. And that's something that we haven't highlighted as much today, but certainly as we develop our toolkit, we'll be sure to share that out. But really it goes across the board. So what we commit to doing is continue to flesh out these tools. So what we do at CSI is not only come up with these ideas, but really rely so heavily on the experts, our partners, and to continue iterating. So what you'll see right now is a version of our toolkit that was just current as of 2 weeks ago. We're building something now that's not just going to be something that's on the web, but that'll, look more produced. We're hoping to have a draft of that tomorrow to share and to get your feedback on it. And we'll continue iterating as we move into the new year. Thank you, everyone, and just so grateful. This is really the hardcore that sticks around beyond 2 hours, right? But so grateful for all of your partnership in so many ways. And Carla, I'm going to turn it to you just for a few seconds. I know that the way Carla got introduced to CSI coming from the Census Bureau, she thought her job was hard in the Census Bureau, and then she came to CSI. So Carla, just so grateful for all of your work on Census Legacies. I don't know if you want to share anything before we close.
Because we're over time, all I'm going to say is that I'm inspired even more than before I joined CSI by this meeting and what's coming ahead. So thank you so much for being here.
Great. Thank you, Carla. Thank you, everyone, for spending your time with us and your talent. And we look forward to working with you. And really, for us, we do not want to own Census Legacies. We think it is important for every single one of you to take whatever piece makes sense. And if we can help support that work and lift up those narratives, we heard so many inspiring examples already today. And we want to make sure that we continue filling those narratives, right? It's still, I mean, many of you may be familiar with each other. Some of you may be sick of hearing about census, but I think from what Terry Ann said is like, get ready for Census 2030, right? But so many folks, including those in media and government and philanthropy, don't know enough about what census has meant. And we need to tell them that it's not just a once a decade thing. What census meant are these powerful insights and commitments that we need to honor with our community partners, our trusted messengers, our goodwill ambassadors. I love that. So many other ideas that are coming up. Please continue to keep the ideas flowing. And Carla and I commit to making sure that we continue lifting up these experiences, these insights, this expertise, and these talking points, right? Sometimes it's just knowing those snappy talking points that can be influential in different venues. So thanks again, everyone. Really, really grateful for your partnership, and more to come in 2021.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Happy holidays.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us. Goodbye. See you in
Bye-bye.
2021.
Bye, Jerry.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Miki, and we'll be back in touch.
Thank you.